Hello again, Doomtown fans. Willing Dunn here, and I'm back to review Double Dealin. This is the second release for Doomtown Reloaded, and it contains 84 cards. That's going to be 21 unique cards and 4 copies of each of those. As with my previous saddlebag reviews, this first video is going to cover the dudes released, and the second video will cover all of the non-dude cards in the pack. The first card we're going to look at today is a 4th ring dude. His name is Leonardo Leon Cavallo. He is a 7 of spades. He's 5 to play with 1 upkeep. He's 1 draw and 2 influence. He has Huckster 1, and then he has a noon boot ability. Make a Huckster skill check against the value of a dude at this or an adjacent location. If successful, boot that dude. So this is basically just a 2 influence Huckster who also has a built-in paralysis mark. That's pretty freaking strong. I think paralysis mark, if you watched my last review, I talked about how I thought that card made 4th ring a lot better than they were in the past. And having a dude with the built-in paralysis mark ability is really, really strong. That said, I think if we're going to be playing paralysis mark, having this dude in the mix is going to be nice, but maybe not the best thing since it's already a tool that we have access to. But I think you're probably going to be playing this guy just because of the whole 2 influence for 5, the fact that he has a useful ability and himself is a Huckster. His value is reasonably high, especially when you consider some of the other options that we have for Hucksters. So I think that this guy is probably going to see play in most 4th ring decks, and I think he's a reasonable contender as a starting dude as well. The next dude is Richard Slavin. He's also a 4th ring dude. He's a 10 of spades, 6 to play, and no upkeep. He's 1 stud, and he's an influence. Noon boot, if Richard is out of town, pull. If the pull is red, search your discard pile or boot hill for a mystical goods card and add it to your hand. So this guy is a no upkeep dude that's worth both an influence and a stud. That alone makes this guy pretty strong. I think if you're looking for a guy to start in your posse, this might be one of the guys you can get as a stud dude. Really, I think the only major contender in terms of stud dudes is Tix. Although Tix has, I think, a much stronger ability protecting your initial Huckster guy from things like kidnapping or ambush. Richard's ability is pretty weak, but I think that if you could get it to work, maybe in the future when there are more mystical goods, this could be really, really strong. If your deck somehow used mystical goods as like a cornerstone of its strategy, this guy could be pretty reasonable. Right now in the game, there aren't that many mystical goods. We have Legendary Holster is a pretty great one, but it encourages you to pull low. That's not really what 4th ring wants to do. And then we have Doyle's Hoyle. I think that's probably going to be somewhat difficult to use in a 4th ring deck as well. Later on in this pack, it'll be in my next review, we have 2 mystical items that are going to be there. So we can talk about this guy a little bit more when those cards come up. The next dude is out of Law Dogs. His name is Mortimer Parsons. He is a 6 of spades. He's 5 to play with 1 upkeep. He has 2 stud, 2 influence, and Mad Scientist 0. If Mortimer is in your posse when you reveal an illegal draw hand, send him home booted and reduce his influence to 0 until after sundown. If you have no other dudes in your posse, the shootout immediately ends. While I don't think this guy is exceptional, I do think he's pretty good. His stats are pretty decent. I really like the 2 influence, and the fact that he has access to Mad Scientist, I think lets us do something in Law Dogs that we're not particularly good at doing. His trait is pretty strong as well. I like the ability for him to weasel out of combats that we don't want him in. And I think that with a lot of the Law Dogs decks that I've been working on, you generally have a choice in the draw whether or not you want to cheat. So I think that this guy has a lot of potential, and I think that maybe we could start seeing mad scientist stuff going on with the Law Dogs. I'm not exactly sure what the best direction to take that would be, but I do welcome the idea of having a Law Dogs deck that could utilize mad scientist and gadgets. The next dude is also a Law Dog. His name is Gang Yi. He is a 10 of spades, 6 to play with 1 upkeep. He has 1 stud and 2 influence. He's a deputy, and he has a shootout ability. Swap him with one of your dudes in a posse that is opposing a wanted dude. So this is another decent influence dude with some stud going on for the Law Dogs. I really like the high value on this guy, and the shootout ability is absolutely incredible. I really like being able to combine this guy with a draw guy or just some sort of cheap dude that you don't have to worry about losing because you can have him, come in and save the day. I think the 10 is really good. It fits well with a lot of action cards that we want to play within Law Dog. I really like too much attention in Law Dogs. I also think Recruitment Drive and Unprepared are both hypothetically playable. So I think the 10 is probably the most exciting thing about this guy and why he would make the cut over maybe some other 2 influence dudes. But all around, this guy has some pretty good stats and a really good shootout ability. I think he's going to fit into quite a few Law Dogs decks. The next dude is for Morgan Cattle Co., and this is Lula Morgan. She's a 3 of spades, 4 to play with 2 upkeep. She's 1 draw and 3 influence. Noon boot, pay 1 Ghost Rock, gain Ghost Rock equal to the production of a deed you control but do not own. I'm not particularly impressed with this dude. I think the cost to influence is extremely strong, the fact that she only costs 4 and is 3 influence, but the low value and the high upkeep I think are going to really limit her usefulness, and her ability is downright bad. I think if it didn't cost a Ghost Rock, it might be a little more worth doing, but realistically, 2 is the highest of most deeds that people are going to have in play. So this is going to be a boot to gain 1 ability that costs 1 to use. I don't really see that being very good, and it's going to involve that you have a guy there. Now, if in the future there are ways that we can increase the production of deeds that we don't, own, maybe that could be a thing we could do with her, but I think for now we're mainly just looking at her as a 4 cost 3 influence guy, and I'm not exactly sure that that's something that the Morgan Cattle Co. needs a whole lot. I do think that she might make the cut just because of the low cost, but all in all, I don't really like this dude. Next is also a dude for Morgan Cattle Company. This is Dr. Emmanuel Ashebell. He is 5 of spades, 4 to play with 2 upkeep. He is 1 draw and 3 influence. Sound familiar? He has a react ability. When a dude is aced, pull. If the pull is higher than the dude's value, discard them instead. Well, there's a lot of similarities with this guy and the dude that we just looked at. The stats are exactly the same. So basically what I just said about her in terms of the stats kind of applies here. I do think that this guy's ability is maybe a little more useful. It's kind of nice to be able to save some of your critical dudes from getting aced, but I don't necessarily see this ability being really strong. I think there's maybe some comparisons to be made to Arnold out of 4th Ring, but Arnold is certainly a lot stronger and I think has better stats for what we're trying to do with this kind of guy. So I think this is a dude that's probably going to make the cut in the same ways that the previous dude we looked at might make the cut, just because of the low cost and the 3 influence with an ability that is occasionally decent. So I don't see this as being something that 4th Ring needs really, really badly, but it is and an effect that's kind of nice to have in your options when you're looking to add those last 1 or 2 dudes to your deck. Next, we come to the Sloan Gang dudes, starting with Angelica Espinoza. She is a 9 of spades, 3 to play with only 1 upkeep. She's a 2 stud with no influence. She has a shootout ability. She joins a posse at an adjacent location without moving or booting. Well, this dude's pretty decent all around. I like a lot of things that she has here. First of all, the high value I think is pretty relevant at dealing with things like paralysis mark and shotgun. So that alone I think makes her pretty good, especially with the 2 stud as well. Her shootout ability is really good. That's very, very strong, lets you reinforce locations you need, and I really just like her ability to join even when booted. So I think she's probably going to be a dude that you're going to be considering, maybe even as a starting dude in some of the Sloan decks, but that 0 influence is really going to hold her back. I think you're probably just going to be putting copies of this in your deck if you want some higher pulls and you want just kind of a decent dude all around. So I like this as an option for Sloan. Not necessarily the most incredible dude, but a really decent shootout ability and 2 stud for a cheap cost and low influence, or upkeep. Next is another dude for Sloan. It is Jose Morales. He is a 10 of spades, 6 to play with 1 upkeep. He's 3 draw and 1 influence. He's Huckster 0. While in a shootout, Jose gains a bonus to his Huckster skill equal to his bullet rating. Well, my first reaction is that this guy is way, way, way better than Jonah Essex as a Sloan Gang-based huckster. Wow, is this guy so much better. So he's about the same cost, but he only has that 1 upkeep, so I think it's a lot easier to start him. He has an influence still, and he's going to be Huckster 3, I would say, as a minimum in a lot of different situations. Now, I think it's going to be very possible in a Sloan Gang deck to increase his bullet rating. So we could potentially see him with a higher Huckster value, especially if he has a weapon. Putting a shotgun on this guy is still pretty decent. You don't necessarily have to cast spells for this dude to be good. So I'm really liking Jose. I think I've been trying to do stuff with Sloan Gang-based spell deck, or just having some spells in a Sloan Gang deck, and this is definitely going to be the way to do it, in my opinion. Even if he somehow loses some bullets and only has a Huckster 1 or something, I think you can build a Sloan Gang deck that pulls not high, but high enough that you'd be able to use the spells you're trying to do. And I think you're probably only going to include a handful of the best spells. You're not really going to be trying to play as many spells as something like a 4th ring deck. So this guy really kickstarts these Sloan Gang-based huckster decks, and I expect him to see a fair amount of play in that type of deck. Next up, we have a neutral dude. Her name is Genesee Gina Tailfeathers. She's 3 of spades, 3 to play, and 0 upkeep. She's 1 draw and 0 influence. She's a grifter, which means you can only have 1 such grifter in your starting posse. And she has React Boot. At the start of the game, discard a card from your play hand to draw 2 cards. So the first thing to say is that she is the second grifter. Travis Moon is the only other grifter, and if you recall, he lets you basically take a mulligan, whereas Gina is letting us discard one of our cards, and we are getting to draw 2 extra cards, so we're going to have a slightly larger hand on the first turn. I think she's reasonably decent. I don't necessarily get too excited about her. I think her ability could maybe work in the right deck, but I don't necessarily see why she's going to be better than Travis a lot of the times. I think in the decks where I'm willing to play Travis, it's a pretty big factor that he's 2 draw, especially if I'm playing something like Shotgun. So she's only 1 draw. That's quite a bit weaker. I don't necessarily like that she also costs more than him. So I don't know if I'm wild about Gina. I think it's nice to have more grifter options within the game, so I'm excited to see that they are releasing some new grifters as quickly as the second pack, but I don't necessarily like this one. Next up, we have another neutral dude. This is Mario Crane. He is a 9 of spades, 6 to play with 1 upkeep. He's 1 stud and 1 influence. He's harrowed, which if you recall means basically he can be counted as an extra casualty. And if you reveal a legal draw hand, Mario cannot be chosen as a casualty unless you lose the shootout round by 3 or more ranks. This is a pretty cool neutral dude. He's really hard to kill, and he's a stud as well as an influence. I think this is probably one of the most generally decent dudes in the game. He's not necessarily overwhelmingly good, but since he's so hard to kill, especially if you can consistently reveal legal draw hands, I think we're going to be seeing a fair amount of this guy see play. I think it's especially good in decks with weak draw structures, since you're going to be a lot more likely to reveal those legal draw hands. Plus, those decks probably need the harrowed dude a little bit more than the shootout-oriented decks would. So I see this being largely played in either Morgan or Fourth Ring, and I see this guy being pretty good in either one of those decks. Just the fact that he's really hard to kill and he absorbs a lot of casualties, I really like this guy, and I want to see more neutral dudes like this that are just kind of generically powerful. Well, we've come to the end of the first half of Double Dealin', but make sure that you tune in to the second half where I'm going to talk about all the cards that aren't dudes. There's a lot of really good stuff in that part, so I'll see you over there. If you like this video, please click subscribe and the button that looks like a thumbs up.